I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Board of Commissioners, Town of Mint Hill, North Carolina, April 13th, 2023. We do have a quorum present. I would like to ask Commissioner Henderson to lead us in the invocation at this time, please.
Let us pray. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to come out on this evening. We ask that you would grant us wisdom, guidance, and direction to handle the affairs that you have before us. And we ask for your protection over the citizens of Mint Hill and the officials of Mint Hill, and that you would just continue to lead us and guide us and direct us as only you can. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. Item number 3 is additions, deletions, or arrangement of agenda items. Get out your pen. Because and underneath the consent agenda, 5E, the adoption of the changes to personnel policy, we're going to remove those from the agenda this evening, and we'll address those next month when we address some personnel changes that are going to be made with the fire department. I'm going to reorder number 8 and number 9, both. We have some guests here that have to travel a ways, so we're going to get them kicked to the top of the agenda, so they're going to go right after the approval of our minutes and stuff. And 8 and 9 will be moved up between 4 and 5, so you know what's going on there. Anything further from staff? If not, item number 4 is approve the minutes of the March 9th, 2023 regular meeting.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Do I have any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Now we're going to have a presentation by Medic. And I think we have John Peterson and John Studnick, is that correct?
Yes, sir. Good
Present.
evening.
If you gentlemen would give us your name one more time, even though I gave it, and your address, and then you have the floor.
You bet. Yes, sir. My name is John Peterson. I go by JP. I'm the executive director at Medic. And with me tonight, I have Dr. John Studnick. He is our deputy director of operations.
Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you, sir. All right, we very much appreciate the opportunity to come and meet with you this evening to go over our proposed response configuration changes at Medic. But before I jump into the slides, I just want to give you just a brief reminder about who we are at Medic and how we're governed. So first of all, we are the only 911 provider for ambulance service in Mecklenburg County. We cover the entire county, do about 170,000 calls a year, about 120,000 or so transports every year. By state statute, EMS is the responsibility of the counties. And in Mecklenburg County, they formed Medic back in 1997. We are a joint agency, jointly partnered with the county and with the Mecklenburg Hospital Authority, currently known as Atrium Health. We are governed by an agency board of commissioners that is appointed by the Mecklenburg County Board of Commissioners, and our commissioners are 3 folks from Novant, 3 from Atrium, and 1 from Mecklenburg County. That is the body which I report to directly. So just a little bit about us there. And then lastly, as far as how Medic is funded, about 75% of the revenue that Medic receives is generated in the form of fees for service. And about the other 25% or so comes in the form of subsidy from the county. Okay. And so we'll dive into the presentation. What we hope to achieve with the presentation this evening is to make sure you understand why we're making the changes and proposing the changes to our response configuration, specifically what we intend to change. But on this slide, I want to focus a little bit on the who. Over the course of the past year, there's been a very collaborative effort between Medic and our first responder partners. When I say first responder partners, I mean both the fire department and the police department. We put together a work group of representatives from fire, police, and Medic to help identify improvements that we could make to the EMS system that would work best for all three first responder services, as well as improve and provide the best top quality care that we can to our patients and citizens here in Mecklenburg County. As I mentioned, it's been a years-long process, and the team, I'm very thankful for the work that they did. The team has done an outstanding job, and what you're going to learn tonight is a direct reflection of that. On the slide here, you can see some of the folks that we've been working with and the agencies that we've been working with. So why change response configuration? The first thing that I want to point attention to is the circles on the right of the slide. The top circle in black, you see 76%. That is the percentage of time that Medic responds to calls with its lights and sirens on as if it is an emergency, life-threatening situation. What we know is that once we arrive on scene and we do a patient assessment, only about 5% of the time do we actually transport the patient to the hospital with lights and sirens because it's truly a life-threatening emergency. So what that means, and how I'll describe that, is our responses versus the outcomes are misaligned. We are responding to way too many calls in Mecklenburg County with lights and sirens. It's dangerous. It's probably the most dangerous thing that we do in our job, and I'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. But what we need to do as part of this process is reconfigure our responses to make sure that we prioritize our sickest patients. We want to make sure that we have ambulances available as much as possible to be able to respond rapidly to the patients that need us the most, the fastest. Those folks that are having cardiac arrest, those folks that are having trouble breathing or severe strokes or severe trauma patients, things like that. We need to make sure that we reserve those ambulances as much as we can, and we're going to describe to you in this presentation how we intend to do that so that we protect our sickest patients. One of the things that we are proposing is that we significantly reduce our use of lights and sirens throughout our communities here in Mecklenburg County. For many years, there have been folks studying the use of lights and sirens, its actual impact or not on patient outcomes, how much does it really make a difference in how fast we can get to a scene or not. And what we know, as I mentioned before, is that it's very dangerous. We increase our chance of an accident by about 50% every time that we respond with our lights and sirens on. In addition to that, we know through recent studies, as well as studies that have been ongoing for years, including here in Charlotte, that use of lights and sirens only saves between 42 seconds and 3 or so minutes on average, depending on the location and the community. So it's not as big of a savings of time as many people think that it might be. In addition, about 6.9% of the medical calls that we talked about earlier with lights and sirens actually result in a critical patient. So there's a low number of percentage of calls that actually require it versus the very high number of responses that we are doing currently today. There have been some studies that I want to point out that I think are good reference for you. They're referenced in the slide, but one is from 2017. It's from the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration. They did a white paper. It's about 100 pages, so it's long, but there's really good information there. They looked at crash data for EMS and fire from throughout the country and made recommendations to all EMS and fire services to consider reducing lights and sirens. And then the other is from a white paper that was published back in February of last year. And there were 14 different signers of that white paper urging EMS to reduce lights and sirens usage to increase safety in our communities. And those 14 signers came from significant national associations, including the American Ambulance Association, the National Fire Chiefs Association, among others. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Studnick. I'm going to have him talk to you a little bit about what happens when someone calls 911 in Mecklenburg County and what they can expect. And I think this helps just kind of set up how things are going to change.
Great, thank you, Commissioners. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. Talk through how we operate our 911 system in Mecklenburg County. So if you haven't had the opportunity before, which is great, and have not called 911, this will be new. If you have, you've probably experienced this. So when a citizen in Mecklenburg County calls 911, you first go to a primary public safety answering point. There are 3 of those in Mecklenburg County, one in Davidson, one in Pineville, and then the City of Charlotte. The City of Charlotte manages most of the 911 volume for Mecklenburg County based on its size and the area it covers geographically in Mecklenburg County. When you connect to that center, they ask every caller one question. Do you need police, fire, or medic? If you state that you need medic, that call is then transferred with one button push to Medic's 911 communication center. Medic operates a 911 communication center. We employ about 40 telecommunicators whose primary responsibility is to triage the calls that come into our center to determine the right level of service that patients should receive. Our telecommunicators answer the phone about 160 to 170,000 times a year and route people through a process to determine what type of resource they need. When you make it to the Medic call center, we pick up the phone. We verify your address or the address of the emergency because we can't help people if we don't know where you are. So we'll ask you to verify your address. And then we go through a protocol called Medical Priority Dispatch that our call takers ask a series of questions that help us to understand how ill or injured a patient may be, right? And so the more questions that we ask, the less likely the patient is to be suffering a critical illness or injury. We're very good at early recognition of critical illness over the phone and quick dispatch of calls. The protocol we use, Medical Priority Dispatch, is a standard protocol used by many EMS agencies throughout the world and the country. It's a national standard for triaging patients. All of our telecommunicators within the call center are certified emergency medical dispatchers through the state of North Carolina. The state of North Carolina recognizes an emergency medical dispatcher as a healthcare first responder. And they have, therefore, the training and ability to use this protocol to identify patients who are sick, ill, or injured. Now, the protocol that our telecommunicators use is not changing. The outcome that they arrive at is what will be changing. So when we get finished asking all of our questions, we land on a final determinant. And that determinant helps us understand what resources should be sent and how quickly those resources should go. Okay? And so what we're changing is how we determine where that final determinant lands. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about what we do today. Today, we have 3 response time criteria that use different modes of response, and by mode I mean red lights and sirens or no red lights and sirens, and use different resources. And by resources I mean whether we use first responders or we don't use first responders. Today, 20% of our 911 call volume uses red lights and sirens and first responders for our sickest patients. Those patients that have a 10-minute and 59-second response time criteria. Those are the sickest patients that we identify through medical triage on the phone. We then have a second category for patients that are not that critically ill, but need medical assistance in a somewhat timely manner. We use red lights and sirens, a 12-minute and 59-second criteria, and we use first responders in this group. And then finally, we have a very low acuity criteria, 60-minute response time window that we do not use first responders on. And these are patients that have a cold or the flu, or perhaps they have a minor injury to an extremity like their hand or a finger. They need some help, but they don't need an emergent response. The 60-minute response time window came about during the COVID pandemic when we had low staffing, we had high volume of low acuity calls, plus a high volume of very sick COVID patients, and we created this response to help us manage the volume that we were seeing during that pandemic. One of the reasons we're revising our response configuration today is because we know that in the emergency that was the pandemic, we put a lot of responses into this 60-minute window, 22% as a matter of fact. And we know from a customer service perspective that there are some patients that likely require a slightly quicker response. And we would like to be able to provide that for those patients. And so we need to make a change here to provide a little bit better service to some patients that we reduced service to during the pandemic. And then finally, we have a line down below that's some alphabet soup. It's our nurse advice, poison control, and crisis lines. So when we ask patients questions, we sometimes find that the patient may be better served by talking on the phone to a nurse. Many of you may have had an experience where you've had an illness or injury at home, or a spouse or a child has had some sort of illness or injury, and you're like, I don't know necessarily what to do, and you'll call your nurse advice line that's provided to you by either your health insurance or your work provider. It's a very similar concept that we have here, except when we triage the call through 911, we'll ask the patient to use Atrium or Novant, and we'll push them to an Atrium nurse or a Novant nurse. And that nurse may be able to resolve their issue without the use of an ambulance or a first responder, and the patient gets the care they need. Sometimes the nurse will refer a call back to us and say, this patient needs to be seen at a healthcare facility. They don't really need an ambulance, but they don't have a way to drive themselves there. And so they'll refer it back to us, and we'll offer those patients a ride share and say, if you are comfortable, we can book you a Lyft or an Uber. They will come to your house, pick you up, and take you to the hospital. Medic covers the cost for that ride share, and we don't send an ambulance. If a patient's not comfortable, or they don't have the technology, or are uncomfortable using a phone to book an Uber or a Lyft, we'll send an ambulance, but at a slower response time. And so that's how we operate the system today. We've been doing it this way outside of that 60-minute response time window since 1997. Have not changed a lot. And as JP said, we know we have a response to outcome mismatch. We respond red lights and sirens today to about 69% of calls up there, and we think that we can safely reduce that. And so we'll look at what we're proposing to change to. The first and most important thing on this slide is that first line, our high acuity responses, 10 minutes and 59 seconds, those that are most ill or injured, doesn't change. They get an immediate ambulance dispatch with fire department first responders to go manage very sick patients. And that doesn't change. What we do see changing is in the next category, we're going to turn off our red lights and sirens, increase our response time by about 2 minutes. If you remember, red lights and sirens saves anywhere between 30 seconds and 3 minutes. So we're going to increase our response time by 2 minutes, immediately dispatch an ambulance, sometimes dispatch a first responder, sometimes not, and go assess and manage those patients. Should be about 18% of our volume now. We've added a response time criteria at 30 minutes. Like I said, there were some patients in that 60-minute response time criteria that we know because we put them there because we had an emergency during pandemic, but we knew we should be better customer service to these patients. And so we're gonna move them up. Even though they're not critically ill or injured, we think we should likely get there in a quicker manner. And so they'll be in that 30-minute response time window. Some of these will have first responders, some of them will not. We'll retain the 60-minute response time window. The 90-minute response time window is what I mentioned before when we get referrals back from nurses and they reject a ride share. We will tell the patient that they will have a delayed ambulance response because all they are seeking is transport to the hospital. And so we will basically schedule them in within that 90-minute time to manage their care. We will retain our advice lines, and we will implement throughout the entirety of Mecklenburg County a first responder only protocol. We've been operating this in the city of Charlotte for the last 5 years. And what this means is there are certain call types where we have a low likelihood of there being a patient present on scene, and we ask our first responders to respond, determine if there's a patient. If there's not a patient, they clear, and an ambulance is never sent, preserving our resources for the higher acuity calls. And if there is a patient, they can ask for medic and we will respond. A good example of these are minor motor vehicle collisions. We have a lot of minor motor vehicle collisions, some that occur in parking lots where there's barely damage to a vehicle and people call 911 and there aren't any patients on scene. Sometimes there may be some fluid that needs to be cleaned up, and so the first responders may have a role there, and they can scope out and see if there's a patient. And if there is, we'll come, and if there's not, then we've had a very quick response. They go in service very quickly, and we preserve ambulances in our community for patients that have a high acuity illness or injury. So the one thing that we want to talk about is very non-critical patients. And we did this test over the last 2 years with 60-minute response times. Typically, our medical director, Dr. Doug Swanson, presents this. He's at a symposium in Colorado, is not able to be with us today, so I'll take his spot. We've had experience with 60-minute responses since October of 2021. And what we know is that it's safe to respond to these patients with an extended response time window. About 65% of the patients we respond to within that window are transported to the emergency department. 35% are not. We're either canceled before we arrive because they find an alternate method of driving themselves to the hospital, determined they really didn't need an ambulance to start with. Someone, like a family member, has come and said, why did you call 911? We can take care of this at home. Or we arrive on scene and we obtain a patient refusal for care because they didn't need ambulance transport. Of those that we do transport to the hospital, less than 1% are acutely ill. They're very, very sick. In fact, that number is more like 0.6% have a high level of illness or injury. And when we look at the data further, while this response time window is 60 minutes, our average response time is much quicker, close to nearly 32 minutes. And about 25% of the time, we arrive on scene within our 12-minute and 59-second criteria today. And so just because they're in a 60-minute window doesn't mean these patients get a 60-minute response. They actually get a response quite quicker than that, but it allows us flexibility. And we have very few truly ill patients in this category. In fact, our medical director, Dr. Swanson, reviews every case where we have a high priority patient from one of these low acuity response time criteria. He reviews their medical record and makes a determination if the response time that medic had an impact on the patient's outcome. And of those patients that have had a severe illness or injury, the response time that medic had to these patients has had zero impact on their final outcome. So in the end, we believe that extended response times will be and are safe in Mecklenburg County as we operate them today. And some of these 60-minute patients will receive a slightly quicker ambulance dispatch and arrival, as we'll be moving many of them into that 30-minute response time window. So I'm going to turn this back over to JP to talk about what this means for our community and to wrap up this presentation.
Thanks, John. Just a couple more quick slides for you. So just to sum things up, first and foremost, rapid response to our sickest patients in this community will not change with part of this plan. In fact, the whole goal of this plan is to make sure that we are even more readily available to rapidly respond to our sickest patients in the community. We're also increasing safety. We're increasing safety to our employees. We're increasing safety to our patients and to the motoring public by reducing our lights and sirens use within the community. And as John just went over, we believe that we will now have a response that better aligns with the actual patient outcomes and patient presentations within our community. Just to give you an idea of the process that we've been going through with implementation, first of all, before I forget, because it's not written on one of these slides, we are moving forward with launching response configuration on Monday, April 17th, this upcoming Monday. I've had an opportunity to work with each of our fire chiefs and they are all prepared and ready to go with that, but wanted to make sure that this body knows that it is coming. We have met now with all of the town councils and city councils within the county. We have been meeting since January, where we started with town managers, did a presentation to each of the town managers in one forum and went through this presentation with them. Was able to get some feedback, working with our fire departments, and then have been out basically on a county tour, if you will. We've done 6 public meetings. These are community meetings, 1 in each county commission district. We've had an opportunity to hear from citizens who decided to come out and spend some time hearing a presentation from us and talking with us. And so we have been down that, sorry, I didn't change the slide. So we've met in each of those, including in your district here as well. And so with that, we would like to have an opportunity to entertain any discussion, questions, or feedback that you might have for us.
Commissioner Henderson, do you have any questions or comments?
One question, going back to the proposed response configuration.
This one?
I think one of my concerns is with the first responder only. Won't this tie up our first responders if they end up having to go on a call and then dispatch an ambulance, and then they've got to wait for them to get there, which is going to be more time?
So the short answer is it could. And as John just mentioned a little bit ago, about 65% of those calls actually result in a transport. So 35% of the time that they respond on calls for those first responder only calls, there won't even be a patient. They'll be able to go available right away. We've been operating this protocol in the city now for 6 years. It's been very successful for us. And so of all of the response configuration things, yes, that is one area where the fire department could be waiting for us. One thing I don't think we mentioned yet is that throughout this process, we wanted to make sure and work with our fire departments to make sure that the calls that they respond to are calls that are actually meaningful, where they can provide some form of patient care. And so, because there are some calls today that our fire departments respond to where they really may not actually need to be there. So we want to remove those off of them to keep them more readily available. So we think our estimate is that our fire departments will see about 5 to 10% actual overall reduction in responses to emergency medical calls with this plan, taking them off of calls that we don't think and they don't think that they need to respond to. Does that make sense? So you look like you're kind of questioning, so I want to make sure I answer.
Yeah, I mean, if it works like that, I mean, I think it, you know, in reality, we don't know until we kind of see it. The other question real quick, and you kind of answered it, but with the whole misalignment, because my first question was, you know, what was the line of questioning? Why was there this gap between 76% to 3%? And what's going to change in that process? I know you said that the outcome determination would change. So is that due to some type of training, and why was that training not there before? Why was the triage not working before?
So the triage absolutely works. It has worked, it will work. The change is the policy on how the determinant is made at the end. So nothing changes for our dispatchers. There's no additional training. They're still going to continue to use the worldwide dispatch protocol called medical priority dispatch that John mentioned. What changes is at the very end, our policy is saying that, okay, that determinant is now no longer a 12-minute and 59-second emergency response. It is a 15-minute non-emergency response, or it is a 30-minute non-emergency response. So the change is really as far as the determinant at the end. The dispatchers really don't have to do really anything different. Did I explain that well enough, John? Is there anything else you'd add? John oversees our dispatch department as well, so I want to make sure he has a chance to cover that.
The only thing that I'd add is that our medical director is responsible for assigning time, resource, and mode. And so what is really changing is that he reviewed all 1,800 final determinants, looked at a set of data that tell us what our current illness or injury severity is within each one of those 1,800 determinants, how often we provide a potentially life-saving intervention, and then made a clinical decision that determinant 1 could be a 10-minute and 59-second response. Determinant 2 should be a 15-minute response. Determinant 1,112 should be a 60-minute response based on a data approach and his clinical understanding of pre-hospital medicine. And so we went through a process of resorting those determinants into these response time criteria. So the questions we ask remain the same, the process remains the same, the outcome, where we treat patients changes, and that's driven by our medical director in a review of each of those determinants. So it's a pretty intensive process to get to understanding what response time, mode, and resource should go on each type of call.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You good? Mayor Pro Tem Dalton.
I've got a few also here. You're saying your average response was 10 minutes and 59 seconds. Is that correct? If I
So,
can get that.
no, not the average response. The current response time requirement for our priority 1 sickest patients is 10 minutes and 59 seconds or less, 90% of the time.
Okay. And for outlying areas like Man Hill, what would that be?
10 minutes and 59 seconds.
So you don't think the numbers are skewed from the Charlotte numbers if you were doing a whole county-wide?
No, I'm not sure I follow your question. So this is the response time requirements for Medic. We must meet countywide 10 minutes and 59 seconds, whether it's in Mint Hill or whether it's in downtown Charlotte. We have to be on scene of a priority 1 response in 10 minutes or 59 seconds or less 90% of the time. That is how our contract is written. Each part of the county, the average response times would vary potentially. Overall, our average priority 1 response time in Mecklenburg County is 8 minutes and 23 seconds.
Okay. I don't think that's happening here. Could you, or would you, put together a monthly report to our chief showing those numbers?
So, yes, sir, we've committed to work with the chiefs of each department on a monthly basis, and we are working on some KPI data that we'll be able to share with them once we've been into response configuration for a little bit, at least a month, to be able to get some data. And we'll share that data with them. We did, at the town manager meeting that I mentioned back in January, we had some requests for response times by community. We provided that already by town. We are in the process of providing priority 2 and priority 3 responses by town. You'll have that likely tomorrow, actually. And so happy to do that, sir.
As a clarification, that will show the number of calls, the time they got the call from the dispatch to arrival.
Yes, what it will show, we wanted to make it as in-depth as we can. So what it will show is the average response times for priority 1 in each community. It will show a mean, it'll show a median, it'll show a 25th percentile, a 75th percentile. There's a lot of data that we're going to be sharing about that, and we'll do that for each of the different response type priorities. There are 3.
Okay. Got another question here. How do you stand on your certification of getting new medics? As far as paramedics, and how are you on that? Because I know police and fire are having an issue throughout the county, throughout the state, probably throughout the country.
Sure.
On the surface, this looks like a way you can't fill the positions and you're making a cutback.
Sure. Okay. So with regard to recruiting, so we've been very transparent for quite a while now that we absolutely have a staffing shortage. We are currently short about 60 paramedics and EMTs combined. That's actually the lowest number that our shortage has been in over a year. So we are making progress. At the height, we were about 75 short. On some good news, we have a program with Central Piedmont Community College that is underway right now that has 42 EMT students that will be graduating in the June-July timeframe, and we expect them to be working on an ambulance by August-September timeframe. In addition to that, the county has provided us funding to create a new pathway program at Medic that allows us to hire people in as full-time employees in our logistics department, and they can basically earn while they learn. So they work for us full-time and go to school, and we provide school at no cost to them. So we are working on on building up our staffing there. But one thing I want to clarify with regards to your question or concern there is that while staffing is absolutely going to impact this, it is not the reason why we created this. We created this as we learned through the pandemic, and of course, over the last 10 years, Medic has slowly been moving towards response configuration changes, and we've been operating the same way for the last almost 30 years. So over the last 10 years, we've started to move. The pandemic basically accelerated that need to move. What this is going to do is going to give us more flexibility during times of crisis, whether it's staffing, whether it's a pandemic, or whether it's just an average daily, I shouldn't say average, but whether it's a daily high call spike. Let's say we have a major incident in the community and we have to send multiple units. This type of response configuration allows us to be able to better triage calls, send ambulances slower to patients who can wait, who are not having a life-threatening medical emergency, and prioritize ambulances for patients who are having a life-threatening emergency.
My only other comment is, when you have a resident calling in and saying somebody has had an accident, you're leaving a lot to that person to diagnose whether an ambulance needs to be there or not. I mean, what if they're not skilled? They're upset themselves, they don't communicate correctly. I mean, that's a big liability that you're taking on somebody else, that they're going to know the procedures or how bad emergency or how bad they're hurt, or whether you're going to send somebody or not.
Yes, sir, that's how it operates today in every EMS system in the United States. Will continue to be that risk no matter what response configuration that we move forward with. Our call takers are highly skilled and trained professionals that are very good about assessing, even in the most emergent situations, someone screaming, crying on the phone, they're in their absolute worst moment of their life. Our folks are really good about being able to determine that information. And in the event that we don't get good information and we end up sending a call non-emergency, there's a couple of different things that can happen in that situation. One is each of our fire department units and our medic units are going to be able to have call notes that the crew chiefs or the captain or lieutenant on the engine can read. And if they determine something in that call notes that they feel should be an upgraded response to lights and sirens, they have the authority and the ability to do that on those 15-minute calls that we were talking about. Also, if the fire department or medic arrives on scene first, but in this scenario, let's just say if the fire department arrives on scene first and identifies that the information that we received over the phone was inaccurate and the patient is much sicker than we thought, the fire department can upgrade the ambulance to an emergency response, and we will immediately do that and move lights and sirens to those calls. That occurs today. That will occur tomorrow in the new system as well.
That's all I got for now.
Thank you, sir.
Commissioner Holton.
I think it's probably long overdue to evolve the configuration. I think we constantly have to be evolving with our environment. With that said, I think that the environment as the general public is now wants everything right now immediately. And EMS is it's not any different. You expect to call 911, you want an ambulance there. My biggest concern is if you fall in one of these lower categories, the 30, 60, or 90, are these patients being told it's going to be 90 minutes or less just so there's not another bog on the 911 dispatch system for them calling back saying, where's my ambulance?
Yes, sir, it's a great question. And we learned that early on when we implemented the 60-minute responses that John was talking about, that we need to do that. Because if we don't inform the caller at some point that they're going to be waiting for an ambulance potentially for up to 30 or 60 or 90 minutes, then they get confused. They don't know what's happening. 10, 15 minutes goes by, they call back, where's the ambulance? And so there is going to be, we call it a script. And when we get on these low acuity calls, the dispatcher will read that script to inform the caller that, good news, you're not having a life-threatening emergency, you're going to be placed into a low acuity bucket. And I say good news, that's not what they're going to say, but they're being placed into that low acuity call, and they can receive an ambulance in up to whatever the minutes are. So they'll be informed. That's very important.
Well, maybe one day there'll be an app where they can track their EMS driver,
I bet there
like
will
you
be.
can with Amazon.
I bet there will be. Yep.
That's all I had.
Commissioner Long.
Yes, sir. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming out here. This is an important part of our life that we don't like to talk about except when we need it. How do we compare to others in North Carolina, such as Wake or Guilford County, of implementing this type of upgrade?
Yeah, so we're actually in North Carolina going to be one of the first, if not the first. We are not going to be the first in the United States. There are others that have. In fact, a large urban system in Fort Worth, Texas, just recently last month implemented a very similar response configuration plan. They're seeing positive results. And there are others in the nation who have been or are looking at doing the same thing. National Association of EMTs and Paramedics supports this. And so while we may be the first in North Carolina, we are not necessarily the first for all.
Okay,
We're on the leading edge.
excellent. What would you say should be our response to citizens? Because they're going to have questions about why is an ambulance driving down the road with no lights? What would be the layperson's response?
Yeah, sure. So, if I can answer that kind of two ways, one of the things that we hear most as far as concerns or complaints for the public is, why did the ambulance turn its lights on and then turn them off? They turned it on and they went through an intersection and then they turned them off. We probably get that complaint way more than we ever get a complaint of an ambulance not going emergency, because if they're not going emergency, most people don't know whether they're on a call or not, so really they wouldn't be able to tell. If for some reason they knew that the ambulance was on a call, maybe the call was coming to them and they wanted to know, why didn't it come with lights and sirens? I think the simplest answer is based on the dispatch triage, it was determined that that call did not need lights and sirens. And just really simple, I think.
Okay. And this is just because I've taught driver's education for 20 years, teaching students to pull over. And what would be the contributing factors to this change in policy other than the updates? And as Patrick said, our changing society, is it the motoring public that we're around, that we all drive in, and the technology, how we're distracted?
So with regard to reducing lights and sirens, all of the above. It definitely contributes to it. If you've ever had the chance to ride along in an emergency vehicle or in an ambulance as it responds emergency, you will see that people don't pull over. They've been trained, but they don't. People struggle to hear us because the music's loud. They struggle to see us because they're paying attention to something else. And that all is a factor in the dangers of responding with lights and sirens, especially through intersections.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I just want to thank both of you for coming out and taking the time to do this. I do want to see that we continue with the community awareness. I hope that the county understands that just this meeting and the one meeting you had in our area has not got it out to the public. As you can see by the number of people in the room, we're not going to reach everybody. I also want to thank you for the service that medics provided to Mint Hill since we no longer have our ambulance service here. I've been really impressed with the service that we've received during that time. I was one of the naysayers that thought this is not going to work very well, but it has worked well. So we want to thank you for that.
You're welcome, sir.
The only comment that I would like to make is that a number of times during the conversation, you've talked about it being data-driven, data-driven, data-driven. So I want to make sure that we are heard loud and clear that we want our fire chief to receive that data monthly so that he knows how to schedule his people and so that he knows how to handle his calls, because his job's data-driven as well, and you'll have the data. So we would like to make sure that we make a request that he gets that.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I hear
With
you.
that being said, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much as well.
Next item on my out-of-ordered agenda, NCDOT presentation on NC 51 and Palomino Drive. Pate Butler, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, if you would give us your name again and your address, please, for our minutes.
My name is Pate Butler, and I'm the Regional Traffic Engineer for NCDOT, and I actually reside in Albemarle, North Carolina.
You have the floor.
Okay, thank you. While I can, I want to introduce Donald Harwood and Jason Brooks. They're here with me from the Design Construction Unit in the division, in case later in the presentation, if you have any questions about the estimate or the design that they've come up with, they'll be able to address those themselves, okay?
Very good, thank you.
Okay. I'm here tonight to talk to you about considering a resolution of support for a treatment at NC 51 and Palomino Drive and Hoods Village Drive. This location was identified on our HSIP program, and One of the aspects of what we do in the regional office is review the locations identified on this program. The purpose of the program is to provide continuous and systematic process that identifies, reviews, and addresses specific traffic safety concerns throughout the state. But what that means is we have a lot of data-driven ways to determine where high crash patterns occur in intersections, along sections of roads, bridges, things like that. This particular location showed up on our intersection site for investigation. When we received it, this was the collision diagram we received, and again, it's Matthews Mint Hill Road and Palomino. This is a collision diagram. We use these. A picture is worth 1,000 words in my world. So instead of looking at a summary of crashes that happen, it's real easy to see from pictures what's really going on. And by this, when it was originally identified to us, this was the crash pattern that came up. It's about 18 crashes, most of which are what we consider angle crashes. And angles tend to be the most severe, can be, and that would be the most distinct pattern that showed up that we were wanting to address or treat at this site. Again, in case you can't place it right off the top of your head, this is an aerial map showing you exactly where it's located. The Idlewild roundabout is just south of this intersection. It's the intersection just north where there's a Food Lion on one side and I believe a CVS on the other. And that's the intersection that we're speaking of. And this is a close-up of it. It shows you that it's an at-grade intersection. It's stop sign control, full movement access, and it has auxiliary turn lanes. There's a lot going on in this intersection for people to be pulling out from a side road to avoid potentially 3 lanes of traffic that could be oncoming. From like the Hood Village side, and Palomino could be the same as well. So in order for this, to be ready for this presentation tonight, we re-pulled the crashes. When it was first identified, we have since gotten more crash data in, so we update everything before we submit it. We're preparing it to be submitted to our program. So this is the most recent crashes that we have in our databases up to date through January 3rd of 2023. At this location, there were 19 total crashes, 12 of which will be classified as angle type collisions again. You'll see there's others that don't really define any type of pattern other than possibly rear ends. But so basically we would focus on the 12 angle type collisions that happen there. And this is in a 5-year period. We typically do a 5-year study period, just to let you know, and that's the period range up at the top. Of those 19 crashes, there were no fatalities. There was 1 A crash type injury, and I'll explain that in just a second. 4 Cs and 14 PDOs. PDOs are obviously property damage only. The cars were damaged, but the people were not. The A-type injury is a critical injury. That is non-fatal, but life-threatening, okay? That's the severity of that crash. And when it says A crash, there could have been 4 or 5 people injured. It classifies as 1 A crash, okay? Just keep that in mind. There could be more injuries involved. It's just classified as 1 A crash. It's classified by the most severe injury involved in the crash. And then there were 4 C-type crashes that were identified. And C is a minor injury, most likely not needing transport, or visible injury, but not life-threatening by any means. This is what we're proposing to do is convert this intersection to a directional crossover. And being that there's a roundabout just near it, that will actually help facilitate this maneuver being done. This is a closer view of what we're proposing. By converting it to a directional crossover, it'll still allow the left turns into the side streets, but anybody wanting to exit the side streets would have to make a right turn. This location works well for this design because Hood's Village Road comes out on the other side so anybody that would want to necessarily make a left turn to go to the roundabout can now come out the other end and still get to the roundabout the same way without being, have to go out of their way. Palomino Drive, also, they could come out, instead of making a left turn to go north on 51, they could make a right, loop through make a U-turn in the roundabout and head that way too. It really does not inconvenience anybody, it also increases the potential, increases the safety at this location and reduces the potential for angle-type crashes. This type treatment, everybody pulling out from the side streets, which is part of the angle-type problem, now only has to contend with one direction of traffic at a time. So all they have to do is look who's coming from the left, and then they're gonna go right and just merge into it. It's not, I gotta wait till both sides are clear and nobody's turning, and shoot across the intersection, going from the residential side to the food line or something like that. They've got to shoot a gap to get over there and hope they don't get hit by several potential lanes of traffic. So by doing this, they can concentrate on one lane approaching them at a time, and it'll make it much safer. The total cost for this location is estimated at 1.3 million and some change. And it gives us a benefit cost of 6.9 to 1. And in our terms, everything I do is safety driven. It has to be backed up by, we have to be treating a safety issue. So for this location, a benefit cost is for every dollar that we spend in safety dollars, we're expecting a 6.9% return, or 6.9% return on it, or 6 times as many in the return. We may still, based on our funding recently, because these types of projects tend to increase in cost before we get them on the ground, and can be significant with the cost of asphalt, just concrete, just everything is going sky high. So we may have to identify some additional companion funds before it can actually submit it. This is slightly over our maximum. Our maximum is usually $1 million for high hazard projects that we submit. This is a little over, it's nothing above what we would typically still be able to submit. I just may have to have a backup source in case it overruns the 1.3. I might have to identify a backup source. I'm not by any means asking you all to do that. We would do that internally, but normally we would just put this project forward and fund the entire thing ourselves, but my bosses now want me to have some backup plans in case that goes much higher. Because by the time we got it on the ground and got it designed and got it on the ground, it might be at 1.8, and I've got to come up with $500,000. So that's the only reason. But all we're asking for is either consideration or resolution of support for this. The reason we want a resolution of support is because we consider this limiting access. They still can maneuver just as much in a different way, but when we limit access, we want the town to buy into it so that we don't go out there and just offend everybody, including you, you guys. But it actually makes it a whole lot safer for all the motorists. The ones that have been in crashes there will easily see that. Others will recognize they really aren't being inconvenienced. All they have to do is go down, make a right turn, and come back out, or come out the opposite side of Hoods Village. So, and with that, if you have any questions, I'll be glad to take them.
Commissioner Long, questions or comments?
No, if it's about safety, you got my vote.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Holden?
Could you go back to that previous slide?
Okay.
That Hoods Village Drive, is that a town-controlled road, or is that DOT? It's
Not ours, it's private.
a private road?
Yeah, I'm assuming it's not ours.
It's
Y'all
not.
can-
It's not.
It has a sign on it that says private, so I
Okay.
assume it's private.
So that's going to increase traffic going through that road there, which I know has speed bumps on it.
It shouldn't increase traffic. The volume should remain the same. All it does is move the maneuver. The volumes coming out of Hoods Village would still be the same. They may just go out a different side of it, depending on which way they wanted to go on 51. If they wanted to go to the left, they may come out the opposite end of Hoods Village. If they want to go to the right, it's going to be the same. Turning in is not even being addressed. We're not even impacting being able to access Hoods Village, so that wouldn't change the traffic from that direction. So it shouldn't increase your traffic. It's just going to force, when they're leaving, wanting to go into that intersection, depending on which direction they want to go, is going to change what they have to do.
Gotcha.
But these type treatments they're called RCIs basically, but they've been implemented in many types of roadways, and they're a much, much safer design than a full movement access type facility, because it eliminates so many potential conflict areas.
Mayor Pro Tem Dalton?
I like it. I don't go to that shopping center much, but every time I go there, I automatically turn right, go up to the roundabout and come back.
You're already doing it. A lot of people don't realize they're already doing it, because I don't want to wait for that whole long line of traffic that's coming, or I don't want to have to wait and contend with so many cross maneuvers. So a lot of people naturally do this without it being in the road themselves, because they know it's quicker and safer for them. So I'm glad you
That's all.
recognize that.
That's all I've got.
Mr. Henderson?
Just one question. Can you just kind of clarify the infrastructure by color that you've got here?
Donna, y'all correct me if I'm wrong. The white would be concrete island
No,
or striped out?
the
You want to address?
red, the dark red, that would be a surface mounted concrete island, like you can see. The yellow is edge line on the left side. White is just normal thermo that you see on the right side, or
Which are pavement
it's
markings.
just pavement markings.
So the raised concrete part was the red that he's saying. That would be a physical barrier to keep somebody from cheating the intersection or crossing through.
Thank you. That's all I have.
The only thing I'll add is I think it'll make good practice for our citizens, because I know at some point in time, NCDOT is really going to fix 51 between here and Matthews. And I hope that's on the record. And believe me, I'm not blaming the three of you here, so you're getting something done here. I have no other questions or comments. I would entertain a motion on the resolution of support that you have in front of you.
So moved as submitted.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We
Appreciate the time.
appreciate you looking out for our citizens' safety.
Thank you.
Really do. All right, let's see if I can get back on track here. Item, I don't know what it is even now. Consent agenda. A, accept February and March tax collectors report. B, accept partial streets for the Summerwood development. C, accept street for the Riley Meadows development. And D, accept February treasurer's report and financial statements.
So
Motion.
moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. We are now going to open up public hearing ZC 23-4 filed by Ed Bowers for tax parcel number 135-301-04 to be located at 4500 Morris Park Drive to request a conditional zoning to construct a new building next to an existing building.
That is correct. Thank you,
You'll
sir.
give us your name and address. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, all. Ken Helfing. I am I'm a resident of Charlotte, and I work here at 4500 Morris Park Drive, which is what we're talking about here today. I am general counsel for OH Capital Assets and OH Morris Park, which runs the business and owns the property there. We have a large 40,000 square foot facility already present there, where we moved there in 2017. We have this nice, beautiful grass lot right next to us. It's contiguous. It's right there. There's just a little pathway. We would like to build there a flex space building that has 4 warehouses. It's going to be a total of 12,000 square feet, separated in 4 different blocks. Office up front, warehouse in the back. Currently, we are growing grass, and we have a beautiful vegetable garden there, and the tomatoes are awesome, better than the market. But rather than grow the grass, rather than grow the tomatoes, we'd rather grow buildings, revenue, and jobs for Mint Hill. So we're here now asking for permission to get conditional zoning, because, and if you're not familiar with 4500 Morris Park, it's the business park that's just off of Lebanon Road and 51 just northeast, in that northeast corner there. There's no residential properties back there, and we are the very back corner, right by the woods. So there's really no impact. It's just better business, better growth, and that's what we're here for. That's the presentation. Any questions? Happy to answer anything I can.
I'm trying to see which slide we can put up there.
The slides are kind of boring. They're just sort of a little aerial
Yeah,
from,
so anybody's ever been in a business park, if you missed the left turn going into the cul-de-sac. They're the ones straight in front of you.
Yeah, that's
There it is. That's the
area.
one, yeah, that's the one I was after. It went
I'm
away.
sorry, are you waiting for me here? So that's the aerial, that's the very back corner, and I'm sorry it's not better, I don't know what Google Air did at the time, but it's actually prettier than that. But it looks very dark there. That dark space is the grass, that little rectangle, that's the vegetable garden. You know, we might have room for it in the back there too, but that's what we're looking to build there, and we're gonna put the 12,000 square foot facility with your permission.
Questions, Commissioner Henderson?
No questions. You have something against tomatoes, or?
Oh, no. They're awesome, and they were huge.
We can make it
Still growing
conditional.
We'll bring you some.
Mayor Pro Tem Dalton.
Is this going to be a full brick building?
It's a steel building with brick facade.
Back end of it also? Because on the drawings we had, the back didn't look like that was brick.
No, not on the back. No, sir, not the back. I mean, that's the docks, the loading and such, so I don't think that's gonna have the brick.
Okay. And all the rest of the buildings out there, brick in the back also?
I don't believe ours is either. I don't think so. We have three sides. I'll have to check. I'll send you a picture just to be sure, and I'll do the same.
Okay. Okay, that's all for now.
That's the corner, yeah.
Commissioner Holton.
Thank you. Sorry they came out so small.
From what I can see and knowing that business park, you're not even gonna be able to see it from 51 or anything.
Oh, no.
And it's just expanding what's already there, so I don't.
You can't
have-
even see from Lebanon Road.
Yeah, yeah, so I'm good.
Commissioner Long.
No, sir.
My only question and my only concern is, and I want you to look at that before take it to the planning board.
I'm sorry, sir?
I said, my only question, my only concern before you go to the planning board is, everything out there in that business park is all brick. I owned a number of units in that business park throughout the years, and ours were brick. We had the loading dock in the back as well, but they're all brick. I want to keep consistent with what's going on out there.
Okay.
So if your particular building is different, I can tell you the truth, I've never driven around the backside of it on your asphalt drive that exists currently that goes past the
That's right.
physical workout center, because I was worried they'd stop me and want me to do some exercise. But, yeah, I would like to keep it consistent. If it's not that way, I can live with it, but if it is that way, I would want this to continue to be brick on the back as well.
Well, I think we'd like it to be pretty and consistent as well. We'll see what
Exactly.
we can do.
Okay,
Thank you, sir.
thank you.
Sir.
Nothing else? Did we have anybody sign up to speak to this public hearing? I'm getting a no from the back. If not, I will now close public hearing on ZC 23-4 filed by Ed Bowers for tax parcel number 135-301-04.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice night.
Next item is public comments. Did I have anybody sign up for public comments? I'm getting another head shake, so I've got nobody signed up for public comments. Unless I've missed something, we're at other business and council matters, number 10, Commissioner Long.
No, sir, I'm good, thank you.
Commissioner Holton.
Nothing here, sir.
Mayor Pro Tem Dalton.
Yeah, I got a few little things here from the chamber. April the 20th, the chamber is having a we'll back up. The women are having a network breakfast on April the 20th. And then on April the 29th, they're having their third annual spring tea. That's on a Saturday at Arlington Baptist Church. The Mint Hill Community Chamber is averaging 4 to 5 new businesses join each month. And they've got 2 UNCC students wrapping up their internship. And looks like we're going to have another one come in, which I didn't find this out until recently. There's 1 to 8 business organizations that get full-time internships through UNCC, and the Mint Hill Chamber of Commerce has been getting that on a regular basis, so it speaks pretty good for what they've done. As far as CARPO, we're not going to have a meeting this month, but last month, through CARPO, we were awarded a grant for some more sidewalk money here in Mint Hill. That's all I've got.
Commissioner Henderson?
Just one thing, the Board of Adjustments met on April the 3rd. There was just one variance that was filed that was granted. That's it.
I mention this about every 2 months that I get to meet. Did you have something else?
I'm sorry.
No, go
And
right
the-
ahead.
The rodeo is coming up for the Mint Hill Historical Society. I believe it's April 21st and 22nd, I believe.
I do mention this every couple of months that I get to have lunch with all the mayors in the county, and that was yesterday. We even had the mayor from Waxhaw join us, so we had a foreigner in the room. When I talk to the other mayors, the job that our police department does, the job that our fire department does, the job that our town staff does, makes it really easy for me to sit there and eat and bow my chest out and just grin. Our people are way above the rest of the county, and I'll say that in the minutes, on the record, out loud, on any of the news channels. You'll see a lot of things in the news recently about cats and some of the transportation issues that are going on in the county, and I want you to know that those are being addressed through the MTC. Where our meeting last month wasn't official recognition, but when they started asking for information about how the MTC was run and how the MTC did this, one of the mayors jumped in and said, "I think I'm the longest serving member here at 6 years," at which point one of the people in the audience said, "Don't think you are, Brian Welch been here for 17 years. So once more, I got to bow my chest out and grin and smile about somebody that's doing an excellent job for our community. With that being said, thank you all for coming out this evening. We appreciate you being here. Next month, bring your neighbors. We're going to try to get this information out about MEDIC, and the best way to do that is to bring them here and you share the message that we received tonight with them. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.